Today on the Playbook Podcast, it's day 3 of the federal shutdown, and Democrats are still struggling to form a coherent and cohesive message that excites and unites their party. Meanwhile, Republicans have been mostly on the same page, but there is some unease among the Senate GOP over some of what they're seeing from the White House. And President Trump declares war on drug cartels, but the White House backtracks. Hello, I'm Adam Wren.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Friday, October 3rd.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Well, Megan, it's day 3 of the government shutdown, and there is not yet an end in sight. There's a procedural side of what's happening to all of this. Thune also said yesterday that he's going to give his chamber the weekend to think about the shutdown and a stopgap spending proposal, and they're aiming for a vote Monday. So essentially, we have a shutdown going into next week. The political side of that, though, Megan, is that amid this public posturing, Democrats are struggling to unite around a singular, cohesive message. We're seeing them win the message war in a lot of public polling. But when we saw AOC and Bernie Sanders kind of release their video about fighting for healthcare, I noticed that it really sort of caused a lot of wish casting among Democrats, that it was those people who were messaging this shutdown and not Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Megan, what are you hearing as you kind of talk to people adjacent to the White House and other Democrats about how this is all playing out?
The thing I think that just has struck me, and to your point, that video, this has just been, Democrats' problem for a long time now. I mean, certainly in the 2024 election, but clearly even before that, is sort of this problem of authenticity, right? The fact that they're sort of maybe on paper saying the right things they need to say to their voters, but it's not really getting them excited. And I think that's where you see someone like an AOC come in, and obviously even Democrats will have, mixed feelings about whether they totally are on board with her policy wise, but she is someone that comes across as authentic, right? And that's where Republicans have really succeeded, I think, as of late, is like sort of winning this authenticity battle. And so I think that's really where we see the challenge here, is that healthcare is an issue that Democrats should be strong on, have historically been strong on, and historically been good messengers on. And yet they really have just sort of failed to really meet the moment here during the shutdown, at least so far.
Yeah, and of course, we can't let go of the political subtext here, which is that AOC may very well be primarying Chuck Schumer,
Yep.
and if she's not running for president in 2028. So a lot to sort of unpack in all of this. But if you look at the Republican side, Megan, and you've covered some of this from the White House perspective, Republicans too, feel like they have the moral authority on the shutdown, but some of them are suggesting that the OMB Director Russ Vought could undermine that by talking about scaling back some of these programs and inflicting pain on Democrats. What are you hearing about his role in all of this?
I think this is such a fascinating moment for Russ Vought and for the White House. People have been talking about, how Russ Vought has wanted to do this forever, sort of go wild on the federal bureaucracy. There was the famous, now famous quote about he's been wanting to do this since puberty, and that may be a bit of an overstatement. But I've talked to a lot of folks close to Vought over the last several months, and they tell me like he literally, in the 4 years of trumping in the wilderness, he would like sit at home with all of his budget documents. And like, he is this like rules and regulations guy. That's what he lives and breathes. And so he really has been preparing for this for the last 4 years. He's had a lot of time to think about this. Now, the challenge here is that for Russ Vought, the kind of slashing of the federal bureaucracy that he wants to accomplish is really ideological. He truly believes in this. And I think that's where you see this sort of split between OMB and the broader White House, right? I talk to folks around the president, and to the extent that he wants to get rid of woke Democratic agencies, sure, he's on board with that. But he doesn't really care that much about slashing the federal bureaucracy or slashing federal spending. I mean, what he's primarily concerned about is bending government to his will. It sort of doesn't really matter as much the size and scope. And so I think that's where you really see this tension here, is that you have, Russ Vought, who could use this moment to do a lot of culling of the federal workforce, to inflict a lot of pain on Democrats. and the federal government. But there is this risk that in doing that, Republicans go too far, right? They've been trying to make this argument that this is the Democrats' fault that we're in this situation. As soon as they start taking steps that they then really own and that Democrats can then place back on the White House and on Republicans and say, hey, look, voters, this is what they're doing, that is going to be very politically thorny for them.
Yeah, these sombrero memes and videos that Vice President J.D. Vance addressed this week in the briefing room. I talked to a Democrat yesterday who told me that every time Trump posts one of these or they get talked about, it's a way of shifting the territory in a favorable way to Trump and the Republicans. Do you buy that? I mean, this is a Democrat telling me this. Is that right here when they're talking about immigration, they're winning essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why you've seen for the last several months the president go so hard on immigration and go so hard on crime, right? Those are issues that Trump and Republicans feel really strong on. Healthcare is an issue Democrats feel really strong on. So you just see folks sort of playing to their bases here and playing to their strengths. But at the same time, I sort of think about this against the broader backdrop of the economic realities this country is facing. There's a lot of pressures on the economy from tariffs. We've seen, increased agitation from farmers, right, wanting some relief and some movement in that regard. But this is a very sort of sensitive time for the country and a precarious time. Of course, we still have many months to go before the midterm elections, but I think you sort of see this shutdown uncertainty and tension playing out against this overall sort of climate of economic unease and uncertainty about where the country is headed. And I think to me that just adds another sort of layer on top of this whole conversation.
Well, also happening today, President Trump is making it clear where his head is amid the shutdown. And it's not just Capitol Hill. Megan, the New York Times reported yesterday that President Trump has decided the United States is engaged in a formal, quote, armed conflict, end quote, with drug cartels his team has labeled terrorist organizations, and that suspected smugglers for such groups are, quote, unlawful combatants, end quote. Now, the White House later played down this assertions, saying Trump was merely explaining the legality of his actions, but not setting new policy. Megan, this is an interesting subplot of Trump's engagement with the world right now, sort of taking these unilateral actions against drug cartels as they're coming over to America. Is he winning on this issue? Where are you seeing this going?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting one because, I think if you ask the average American, they have a lot of concerns about drug cartels and the impact that's having on the U.S. as the stemming the tide of fentanyl into the US. I think this is something that is on a lot of Americans' minds. It was a common refrain during the president's campaign. He's expressed a lot of concern about some of these really tragic fentanyl deaths. And so I think you see on one hand this significant concern from voters about it, but I do think that there may be more of a question when it comes to is this the right way to go about it? And obviously the sort of policy implication here is that, historically the US has treated cartels and suspected smugglers like criminals, right? They are civilians, they are entitled to due process, right? And now what we see the president in the White House saying is no, we are treating them as terrorists and therefore we can take this unilateral action, including and up to killing them, right? And that really is the argument that the White House is going to have to sell to the American people. Is that a bridge too far? Voters will have to decide, whether they think that sort of that response meets the threat of the moment.
We often like to end the podcast with something from the Playbook newsletter. The director of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Library in Kansas is out of a job after reportedly refusing to give President Trump a historic sword. Yesterday, Todd Arrington said he was told to resign or be fired after he did not part with one of President Eisenhower's swords from the library. their museum collection. Trump had reportedly wanted to give the sword to King Charles III during his recent state visit. Megan, I'm curious, if you could gift any U.S. artifact to a foreign head of state, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question, Adam. I'm a big history nerd and document person, so I would have to say the copy of the Declaration of Independence. I don't know if that can be gifted to a foreign head of state, but I think it would be so cool to have one of those as President Trump has hanging in the Oval Office. But I'm pretty sure we don't just hand those out to foreign heads of state.
For me, I think it would be pretty cool to have and or give Lincoln's top hat. But I don't know that I would want the country to part with that bit of history. Megan, thanks so much for being here.
It was so great being here as always, Adam.
And that's all for today's show, but we have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back Monday. Have a great Friday.